Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about something really interesting, I think. It's the gender gap in beliefs about the afterlife and supernatural phenomena. And our main source for this is the Pew Research Center's American Trends panel.
Okay.
And it shows some pretty surprising differences between men and women.
Yeah.
And it really made me wonder why women seem to be more drawn to these topics than men. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? It's definitely something that you see pop up, again and again, a lot of different cultures and different studies.
So we're not just talking about American trends here.
No, it's definitely a global thing. I mean, you see it across decades and cultures. There's a lot of global studies that have found similar things.
So it's not just a, recent fad.
Right, exactly. It seems like there's something a little bit deeper going on here.
Yeah. And the Pew data really brings that home, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
It's really fascinating, and it's more than just like a feeling or a hunch.
Right.
We've got some data from sources like the Pew Research Center.
Exactly. And speaking of the Pew Research Center,
Yeah.
their American Trends panel specifically gave us some really interesting insights for this deep dive. For example, they found that almost 75% of women
Wow.
believe that everything happens for a reason.
Okay.
But for men, it's only 6 out of 10.
Huh.
That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it's significant.
Wouldn't you say?
It is. And this gap isn't unique to just one belief.
Right.
We see it popping up when we look at beliefs in heaven, fate, even reincarnation.
Yeah.
Consistently, women show a higher likelihood of holding these beliefs.
So why do we see this gap?
Well, one of the leading theories points to the roles women have traditionally held in society.
Right.
Think about it. If you're often in a position of caring for others,
Yeah.
dealing with life's fragility on a daily basis, it's natural to start asking those big why questions.
Right?
What's the point of suffering? What happens after we die? Does a higher power have a plan for us?
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when you're constantly facing these big life questions head on, you're almost forced to search for answers.
Yeah,
Even if those answers lie in the realm of the supernatural.
exactly. And beyond individual roles, there's also the aspect of cultural narratives.
Okay.
Women are often seen as the keepers of tradition, especially religious tradition.
Huh?
This could lead to a stronger connection to those spiritual frameworks, and in turn, a deeper belief in the supernatural.
But is it just about roles and traditions? Can there be something deeper going on here?
You're right to question that.
Okay.
It's not just about the roles themselves, but also the social structures that surround them.
Okay.
Religious communities, for instance, offer a strong sense of support, which can be especially attractive to women.
Right.
And within these communities, beliefs about fate, destiny, and the afterlife are reinforced constantly through discussions and shared experiences.
Yeah.
It becomes a sort of feedback loop.
So it's not just about being a woman, it's about being a woman within a specific social context that nurtures those beliefs.
Precisely. Now, this brings us to another intriguing explanation. The idea that beliefs in a higher purpose or an afterlife can be incredibly comforting,
Okay.
especially during times of stress. Research has shown that women, on average, are more likely to seek out emotional and spiritual support when facing challenges.
Right.
Imagine facing a hardship,
Yeah.
Believing in a benevolent force or a life after death can offer hope and meaning during those tough moments.
It's almost like a psychological safety net woven from belief.
Yes, and research has found some interesting things when we start controlling for factors like education or marital status.
Wait, hold on. Why is it important to control for those factors?
Good question. You see, without controlling for them, we might mistakenly think the gender gap is simply because women are, for example, less educated than men on average, and that lack of education leads to higher religiosity.
Okay.
But when studies compare men and women with the same education level and find that the gap still exists,
Right.
it suggests something more is at play than just those background demographics.
That's really interesting. So we're starting to see that this gender gap in belief isn't just a surface level observation. It runs deeper and is influenced by a whole bunch of complex factors.
Absolutely. And there's one more layer we haven't even touched on yet, the role of upbringing.
Ah, the nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah.
Are we born with certain predispositions towards belief, or is it all about how we're raised?
It's a fascinating question, and one that researchers are still exploring.
Yeah.
There's some evidence suggesting that daughters might be encouraged more than sons to connect with religious traditions.
So even within families, there might be subtle differences in how boys and girls are exposed to these ideas from a young age.
Exactly. Imagine growing up in a religious household where girls are more actively involved in rituals and traditions. It's not hard to see how that could shape their worldview and make them more receptive to supernatural beliefs later in life.
It's like planting a seed of faith that continues to grow and blossom as they get older. But I'm sure you'll agree that it's not as simple as saying all women are religious and all men aren't.
Right.
There are tons of individual differences, right?
Of course. We're talking about general trends and averages here, not trying to fit everyone into neat boxes.
So what you're saying is that the data points to a fascinating pattern. Women, on average, tend to be more inclined towards these beliefs, and there's a complex web of social, cultural, and psychological factors that contribute to this pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a hard and fast rule, and we need to be careful about making sweeping generalizations.
Exactly what makes this research so intriguing is that it gives us a glimpse into the human mind and how we grapple with the big unknowns.
It's like holding up a mirror to society and seeing reflected back not just what we believe, but why we believe it. And this gender gap provides a really unique perspective on those questions. But what happens when we take this conversation into the future? What happens when those societal roles we talked about start to shift and evolve?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole discussion, the potential for change.
Okay.
As gender roles continue to become less rigid, we might see the belief gap narrow as well.
So you're saying we could potentially see a future where men and women are more aligned in their beliefs?
It's a possibility, but it's not a guaranteed outcome.
Right.
Some argue that even with evolving gender roles, inherent psychological or emotional differences between men and women might still contribute to this gap.
It's like the age-old debate about nature versus nurture. Are we predisposed to certain ways of thinking about the world, or are our beliefs primarily shaped by our experiences and environment?
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
And the answer, as with most things in life, is probably a combination of both.
Right.
We can't discount the possibility that there are biological factors at play, but we also can't ignore the immense power of social conditioning and cultural influences.
It's like we're all born with a certain set of predispositions, but then our experiences in the world around us mold and shape those predispositions into something unique.
That's a great analogy. And when it comes to belief that shaping process is influenced by everything from our families and communities to the broader cultural narratives we're exposed to.
It's almost overwhelming to think about all the different forces that come together to shape our individual belief systems.
It really is. And this is where I think it's important to remember that we're not just talking about abstract concepts here. We're talking about real people's lives, their deeply held convictions and values.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the data and the research and forget that behind all of that are individuals wrestling with these questions in their own personal way. And those individual journeys are just as important as the broader trends.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another layer of this conversation. How technology and globalization are changing the landscape of belief.
Okay.
Think about it. We live in a world where information is readily available at our fingertips.
Right.
Where different cultures and belief systems are constantly interacting and colliding.
It's like a giant melting pot of ideas and perspectives. How do you think that's impacting the way younger generations especially approach these questions of belief and spirituality?
Well, it's definitely giving them a much wider range of options than previous generations had.
Okay.
They're not limited to the traditional religions and belief systems of their families or communities.
Yeah.
They can explore different philosophies, spiritual practices, and even create their own unique blends of belief.
It's almost like they're building their own spiritual buffet, picking and choosing the elements that resonate most with them.
Exactly. And this freedom of choice can be both liberating and overwhelming.
Uh-huh.
It can lead to a more personalized and meaningful approach to spirituality.
Yeah.
But it can also create a sense of uncertainty and rootlessness as traditional anchors of belief are loosened.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
On one hand, there's this amazing opportunity for exploration and self-discovery, but on the other hand, there's a risk of feeling lost in a sea of options, unsure of what to believe or where to turn for guidance.
that's a really insightful observation, and it highlights the importance of having these conversations,
Yeah.
of exploring these complex issues with open minds and a willingness to learn from each other.
You're absolutely right, because ultimately understanding why people believe what they believe,
Yeah.
even if those beliefs differ from our own, is crucial to building bridges of understanding and empathy in an increasingly diverse world.
I agree.
I think it's time we shift gears and dive a little deeper into this idea of evolving gender roles and how they might be shaping the future of belief.
Sounds good to me. It's interesting to think about how these evolving gender roles,
Right.
might actually manifest like in the realm of belief.
Yeah.
We've seen massive changes,
Yeah.
in how women participate in society,
Yeah.
from work to family structures.
Yeah.
It stands to reason that those shifts would have a ripple effect on how we view spirituality too.
You're absolutely right. I mean, just a few decades ago, it was pretty uncommon to see women in leadership positions within religious institutions.
Right.
But now we're seeing more and more women taking on those roles, challenging traditional hierarchies and interpretations.
Exactly. And that change in leadership can lead to a change in doctrine, or at the very least, how those doctrines are presented and understood.
It's like we're witnessing a slow but steady evolution of religious thought, shaped in part by the changing roles of women in society.
And let's not forget the impact this has on younger generations.
Yeah, right.
They're growing up in a world where gender roles are much more fluid and less defined than in previous generations.
So how do you think that's influencing their approach to spirituality and belief in the supernatural?
Well, some researchers believe that this exposure to more egalitarian gender roles could lead to a narrowing of the belief gap we've been discussing.
Okay.
If young men and women are raised with the idea that gender shouldn't dictate your role in society or even your spiritual beliefs,
Uh-huh.
we might see them approach these questions in a more similar way.
So maybe those traditional lines that have divided men and women when it comes to belief will start to blur, and we'll see more convergence in how they think about the afterlife,
Yeah.
fate, or even the existence of a higher power.
It's certainly a possibility, but of course there are other perspectives to consider too.
Right.
Some researchers argue that even with evolving gender roles, there might be inherent psychological or emotional differences between men and women that continue to influence their beliefs.
That makes me think about the nature versus nurture debate again.
Yeah.
Is it our biology that drives these differences, or is it the way we're socialized?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And the answer, as is often the case, is probably a complex mix of both. We can't discount the possibility that there are biological factors at play, but we also can't ignore the immense power of social conditioning and cultural influences.
It's like we're all born with a certain set of predispositions, but then our experiences and the world around us mold and shape those predispositions into something unique.
That's a great analogy. And when it comes to belief, that shaping process is influenced by everything from our families and communities to the broader cultural narratives we're exposed to.
It's almost overwhelming to think about all the different forces that come together to shape our individual belief systems.
It really is. And this is where I think it's important to remember that we're not just talking about abstract concepts here.
Right.
We're talking about real people's lives, their deeply held convictions and values.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the data and the research and forget that behind all of that are individuals wrestling with these questions in their own personal way, and those individual journeys are just as important as the broader trends.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another layer of this conversation, how technology and globalization are changing the landscape of belief.
Okay.
Think about it. We live in a world where information is readily available at our fingertips, where different cultures and belief systems are constantly interacting and colliding.
It's like a giant melting pot of ideas and perspectives. How do you think that's impacting the way younger generations especially approach these questions of belief and spirituality?
Well, it's definitely giving them a much wider range of options than previous generations had. They're not limited to the traditional religions and belief systems of their families or communities. They can explore different philosophies,
Right.
spiritual practices, and even create their own unique blends of belief.
It's almost like they're building their own spiritual buffet, picking and choosing the elements that resonate most with them.
Exactly. And this freedom of choice can be both liberating and overwhelming. It can lead to a more personalized and meaningful approach to spirituality. But it can also create a sense of uncertainty and rootlessness as traditional anchors of belief are loosened.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On one hand, there's this amazing opportunity for exploration and self-discovery, but on the other hand, there's a risk of feeling lost in a sea of options, unsure of what to believe or where to turn for guidance.
That's a really insightful observation, and it highlights the importance of having these conversations, of exploring these complex issues with open minds and the willingness to learn from each other.
You're absolutely right, because ultimately understanding why people believe what they believe, even if those beliefs differ from our own, is crucial to building bridges of understanding and empathy in an increasingly diverse world.
Wow, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole topic.
We really have.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that belief isn't static. It's constantly evolving, both on an individual level and across societies. What we believe today might be completely different from what we believe tomorrow or what future generations will believe. But before we get too carried away thinking about the future, let's bring it back to the present.
Okay.
What are some key takeaways from this deep dive that our listener can ponder?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the gender gap in supernatural beliefs is real and persistent. But, it's not about judging or stereotyping anyone.
Right.
It's about understanding that these differences exist and exploring the fascinating tapestry of factors that contribute to them.
It's like realizing that our beliefs aren't just personal convictions, they're also products of our history, our culture, and the social structures we inhabit.
Exactly. And this deep dive has shown us the intricate interplay of social roles,
Yeah.
cultural narratives, psychological needs, even childhood experiences.
Uh-huh.
It's a reminder that our beliefs are rarely formed in isolation.
Right.
They're influenced by a whole web of interconnected factors, many of which we might not even be consciously aware of.
It's almost like we've been holding up a mirror to ourselves this whole time, examining not just what we believe, but why we believe it. And the gender gap has given us a unique lens through which to do that.
I completely agree. It's been an eye-opening exploration, and I hope it's sparked some curiosity in our listener to keep digging deeper into this fascinating world of beliefs.
So to wrap things up, where do you think this leaves us? What's the one thing you'd like our listener to walk away with today?
I think the most important thing is to approach these conversations with curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions. Remember, there's no one right way to believe. And understanding why people believe what they believe, even if those beliefs differ from our own, is key to fostering greater understanding and connection in our increasingly diverse and interconnected world.
Beautifully said. And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of knowledge and ideas.